So my final guest, as I just mentioned this afternoon, is Senator Mike Braun, the Republican senator from Indiana. He serves as a ranking member of the Subcommittee on Employment and Workplace Safety, which has jurisdiction over a lot of employment issues, including workforce, education, and training. Senator Braun, it's great to see you again, and thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us what the workforce situation in the Hoosier State is. I know that this has been a big priority of yours, and you've done things in the past. You know, I feel like I'm not entirely coming to this so late in the day, but I'm impressed with many of the conversations we've had at the scale, the impact that programs are engaged in this important challenge for the country. But I know you have been in Indiana as well. So tell us about the Hoosier workforce.
So the Hoosier workforce, it's the number one issue, and especially pre-COVID. We're a low unemployment state, lead our peer states within the Midwest. Indiana's got a great business climate. I'm from the county that has the lowest unemployment rate in our state, generally month after month, and live in a town of Jasper, Indiana, with probably close to a 1% unemployment rate. Full of entrepreneurs, getting properly trained people into the jobs, never have any issue with four-year degrees. We ship twice as many of them out of the state as we use in the state. But my special perspective, Main Street entrepreneur, had a business that's grown 20% on the average every year for 40 years. Employment's pretty linear with sales. It's always been a challenge. And I served on our local school board for 10 years, from 04 to 14, and then went to our state legislature for 3 years, was on the education committee one of those 3 years until I started talking too forcefully about higher education giving more than lip service to CTE and changing curricula to reflect what we as employers need. Needless to say, I was off the education committee that next year I was in the state legislature. That's when I decided to run for Senate. It, along with rural broadband, affordable housing, are the three big issues I hear about all the time. COVID has put it into a new level of challenge. When you got bureaucratic governmental things that kind of usurp, take over the dynamic, it's made this a lot harder for small businesses, especially, than what it needed to be. So I'm worried that now that we're right back getting on our feet, most businesses have done great keeping their employees and their customers safe. You've now got vaccine mandates that no one knows how they're going to grapple with that. We had a local, one of our larger healthcare companies just lost 125 employees, I think, in one location due to pushing that issue. That is probably going to be the harshest thing for us at the small, medium-sized businesses to contend with of any of the stuff that's come down the pike.
Well, Senator, let me just ask you, because you raised vaccine mandates, and I've talked to everybody in the full spectrum across the board on the question of how do you get the public health equities right? How do you deal with commerce? How do you deal with different sides? You know, a system where one size does not fit all. But as much as you have vaccine mandates, you also have mandates against, say masks in Florida or something like this. How do we get to people of goodwill who may see the world differently in a political system beginning to say, you know what, maybe one size doesn't fit all, but we've got to put public health there. We've got to, deal with the nature of this. I just sort of see that element missing. People of goodwill who see the world differently as opposed to a stridency. Does that make sense?
I think it does, and I think, how do you get there? Because, I've from the get-go said, if you don't have a good reason, get the vaccine. We were blessed we had one that quickly, but when it comes to mandating it from the federal level, for sure, I've got something out there once we actually get the text of that will try to challenge that on its merits, and even the state level. I'm okay with businesses and local school boards. That's kind of where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
And you're going to do things at the state level or the federal level from the top down. You're all of a sudden saying broadly, I know what's better for your business and your employees than you do. And I think it's consistent to have that latitude to whether you do something with vaccines or not. being done at those lowest levels. If you don't like what your school board's doing, being too heavy on certain policies, you can maybe get somebody on the school board that most of the people like in your community.
Yeah.
And at least at the business level, you've got other options maybe not to work there. But when the government makes you do it, federally or at the state level, that's another issue. And that complicates the whole topic we've got here currently on workforce in general.
Right.
It just makes it something that we didn't need it at this stage of the game because places were finally getting back on their feet, especially in Indiana.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm going to do one more quick thing on this because I am sure I have colleagues from the Hill that are just so excited. You just talked about a piece of legislation that you might do. So I know it's not written or drafted yet, but can you share with us, flirt with us a little bit on what some elements of that might be?
Senator Sullivan and I are going to do a Congressional Review Act of that vaccine mandate when it's released in text and fleshed out. In other words, we're going to look to see if that in fact was in order. We talked about it today at our lunch, and you're going to have all other kinds of probably court action that looks at, can this happen? I think they feel confident that, at least in the short run, they may be able to enforce it through OSHA. I think there's going to be, of any of the stuff that's been done, federal employees would be one thing. But when we've been trying to help small businesses, by the way, defined up to 500 employees, did the CARES Act, the PPP to help them, and now we've lowered the threshold to 100 employees. That's 93,000 businesses that get thrown into the mix that wouldn't be there if we had kept the threshold at 500. It's going to cause a lot of scrapping, and I think of anything that's happened in the COVID saga, that more than anything is going to create a dust up and be counterproductive. Extended unemployment benefits, almost any business owner was grappling with that. Those disappeared in a couple weeks ago, and now you have this, which will be far worse than that.
Let me ask you a question, Senator, about the construct of the business ecosystem in your district. I'm so intrigued that you have the lowest unemployment levels in your state. And so when I'm thinking about it, I've been pondering in my head, what does that mean? In a way, it means you're so tight, things are going well. But as we're talking about upskilling in this coming strategic leap in which automation comes in, 5G comes in, new robotics, so just the evolution of what happened, there'll be displacement effects. And I guess my tough question to you is, how do you take your community, which is doing so well, and still get it to anticipate adaptation? And so that the adaptation gets absorbed, that people get, into that and remain. So I guess I'm asking you an unfair question because I don't think it's necessarily a policy question, but it is kind of an eco-culture question.
It is, and that adaptation, or accepting change and finding out how to benefit from it, is something that any good company does, especially on the revenue side. And many companies now have got that all down well, but they're trying to adapt to how do you get, I resigned as CEO of the company I ran for nearly 40 years. 3 of my 4 kids run it now, and a good young executive team. But our issue is more with inputs and labor. A third of our employees are truck drivers. That's at the worst end of the scale when it's trying to get people staffed. And you adapt, in my opinion, by having that culture that tries to address it at the grassroots level. And Senator Hickenlooper and I did a subcommittee hearing on the very subject today, and I made it clear that high school curricula needs to be the place where we start teaching life skills. When I went to high school, you could take an industrial arts class, you could learn to weld, you could get in a wood or metal shop. Many of the rural schools are doing that again. And part of the issue on workforce in terms of culture is from your state boards of education that generally still give lip service along with stigmatizing that journey of learning from middle school through high school what your options are other than borrowing $100,000, and that would be getting by cheaply through a public university.
Yeah.
And half of the people that don't make it through the end line of that journey, and 1/3 of the half that does gets a degree that doesn't have a market. We got to get better at fixing that at the high school level through curriculum and through guidance counselors, and to where state boards of education buy into it, as much as businesses now are doing it through apprenticeships, and state governments are trying to do it through certificates and degrees. I think it has to get more basic. That's the culture we're trying to build at the grassroots level where I'm from.
Look, I want to squeeze in two more quickies. One from our public that has a great question for you. But I'm so intrigued. I've interviewed John Hoeven before, one of your colleagues, Joe Manchin before. And the interesting thing about these guys is that they were former governors. And so a former governor who became a U.S. senator is interesting. They have a certain view of the world. But I'm also interested in people who were former CEOs, and what you came in. And when you kind of, Joe Biden, of course, was in the Senate for a long time, not a former CEO. But when you kind of look at that experience of having worked run a company, been at the helm to kind of look at the different things, what are the gaps in understanding that your colleagues have with that experience that you bring to the U.S. Senate?
So interesting kind of tiers of who would have the best perspective there. CEOs would have a lot better perspective than governors. Most governors have come through the world of politics, so they're trying to interpret what the needs are on the street. Governors would have a lot better understanding than only somebody that's been in Congress or the Senate. So, and I think that's whenever we try to put policy together on this subject, I'm really apprehensive about doing much of it from here, because education is the bailiwick of local and state governments. And they need to do it in a way that talks to business owners, gets into school districts to make sure that they're promoting not only the AP approach, the 4-year degree pursuit after secondary education, and engage the parents who have now had a graduate or two maybe end up in the basement with all that debt and no job, in the understanding of what needs to be done. That is simply understanding your market like you would a CEO to drive sales. But sadly, for most companies now, your inputs may be a bigger challenge, especially labor, than growing revenue sources. And I always look to the basics, the bottom up. It costs less, it works better, and that's what governors need to do, and especially senators and congressmen that have done neither of the two.
Well, fascinating. We have to have you back. I'm going to have a question here from Tina. Tina?
I'm Tina Wojner, the program manager with WEMA, the Water and Wastewater Equipment Manufacturers Association. We're a trade association based in Leesburg, Virginia, and we represent the manufacturers of water treatment technology. My question is, how do we change the perception of physicians that don't require a 4-year college degree? We currently have many good yet unfilled jobs in our industry, and there are others in other segments of our economy. This is particularly challenging as our workforce is also retiring, what many call the gray tsunami.
Thank you for that, Tina. Did you hear that okay, Senator?
Why don't you paraphrase it a little bit?
I think paraphrase is, to get to the bottom line, she basically is, how can we change the perceptions of physicians that where a 4-year college degree isn't required? It really comes to this question of flexibility, if you will, but there's also the question of stigma. If you don't have the 4-year degree, are you looked at as seriously by our community? I'd be interested in your thoughts as well.
I'm going to give you the two ends of the spectrum, and I've referred to them already. Your state boards of education, we've got somebody that is also commissioner of higher education. We have for so long put people on that pathway without talking about any of where the job openings are, high demand, high wage. That is going to probably be harder to get them to turn their attention in a real way to what we need. I think parents Parents are the stakeholders that probably are more concerned as their kids get into middle school, especially into high school, now that they've had graduates that got a degree not marketable. They need to be looked at as well and engaged in the process. And I think that's where, through your local school boards, traveling Indiana, I pledge to visit all 92 counties each year. It is interesting how the rural school districts who have to work harder to attract industry in the first place are starting to reinstitute wood and metal shops, industrial arts, learning how to weld, maybe a life skills course that would be beneficial for whatever you do after you get out of high school. That's the grassroots of convincing how you fix it on one end, because I feel that higher ed is so bought into the mantra that if it's not a 4-year degree, you're not going to be successful. It may take longer for them to get to buy in to where we converge in the middle, having everything working in sync.
Senator Mike Braun, I wish we could talk for like 2 more hours. I'm sure you want to escape, but it's just fascinating conversation. Would love to keep this up. I'll say hi when I see you over in the Capitol next time. But I want to thank you, Senator Mike Braun of Indiana, talking to us about Hoosiers and so much more, ranking member of the Senate Help Committee, Subcommittee on Employment and Workforce. Thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to do so.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. Wow, what a great set of conversations. A big thank you to Philip Morris International for its support and to all of you attendees who watched all of this. For any of you who missed these conversations, we'll have this video up from the event up on our website shortly. I'm Steve Clemons. Be well.